Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today we're going at least to Australia and then someplace else to a tropical place where we have plants growing behind a friend. And a new friend named Eliot Jacobson, who's going to tell us all about whatever we need to know about the climate. But I'm going to have him introduced by somebody I know a little better, and that is my friend Robbie Tulip, who is in Australia. And he's set this up, and I'm just not getting acquainted with Elliot. So Robbie's going to introduce you. Hi, Robbie. Take over.
Thanks so much, Meta, and warm welcome to Elliot to join us for this conversation with Project Save the World. I really appreciated Elliot's work as I've followed it in just climate analysis, and hopefully through the course of our conversation, I've just taken a couple of shots of information that Elliot has shared on Facebook and X and other platforms. Elliot is a professor. I'm not sure of what. What's your field, Elliot?
Well, I was a mathematics professor for 15 years, and then I moved over to computer science and did that for another decade.
Yeah, and so because I've been mainly familiar with the quantitative data that you've presented on climate change and found it really interesting, and then you've got Climate Casino in your title, and you've published a few books on gambling, which is another field. Maybe we don't need to go into that, but you've got that background as well. So Elliot is what. Whether he is or he's interested in the whole question of doomism, and that is this sense that the climate situation is so serious that there's no hope. And I don't agree with that perspective, but I find it a really interesting conversation. You know, how much does the data about climate change indicate that we're on a trajectory of collapse? Like, is it possible is there anything that we can do to avoid collapse? Now, my sense, like the debate that we've been having in the Healthy Planet Action Coalition and some related groups, has been about whether how emission reduction, which is the main focus of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and governments in their efforts to address climate change. But it's clearly far too small and slow and difficult to make any difference to the heat that's really causing collapse. So do you mind, Elliot, if I just go through a couple of your slides, and then we can use those to introduce a conversation?
Let me just make one quick comment, though.
Please do that first.
You gave a one-sentence definition of doomism. I would disagree wholeheartedly with what you expressed as your definition. And in fact, I have an article on my blog, climatecasino.net, in which I offer up, I believe, 22 different definitions of doomism or doomers, dating all the way back to Thomas Malthus. So I think it's a much larger topic than just how you've painted it right there, but I'm willing to grant you that, and let's go on.
Okay, so what did I say?
You said it's people who essentially don't believe there's any hope and that collapse is inevitable.
Right. Okay.
That was your definition. I'm just repeating it back to you.
Fine. Thank you. So that's, I suppose, the impression that I've had. And opening up that conversation with you is a really valuable way to explore, I suppose, how we can be realistic. You know, to me, that's the most important thing. And so I'll share a slide that I've used that you made, which I find really valuable, which is looking at NASA data
Yeah.
about the Earth's albedo decline. And so the albedo is a topic that I've found really central to climate policy, because what we see here is that and I'll just add my, I thought that I'd be able to, back in 2003, the albedo was at 29.33%. And this STERRA's satellite, that's clouds and Earth's radiative energy systems,
Hold on.
run by
We got a definition here. Some of our viewers will not have ever heard the word albedo. So you need to back up a bit, Robbie.
Yeah, that's right. And so albedo is the amount of sunlight that the Earth reflects back to space. So if you look at the Earth from the moon, for example, then it's quite bright. And all of that brightness is that this roughly 30% of the sunlight that hits the Earth is reflected back to space, mainly from clouds and snow and ice and also atmospheric aerosols. But what's been happening as a result of global warming is that the amount of sunlight that's reflected, that is the measure of albedo, has been falling quite drastically. And so what I did with this chart that Eliot made, showing the decline from nearly 30% at the turn of the century down to about below 29%, 28.7% today, I had a look at this, and I added just some trends, and I'd be eager to just sort of use this as a first conversation point. So for the first decade of the century, albedo was falling by 0.15% in that decade. Then the second decade up to 0.3%, and now, if you can see that, it's up to a decadal rate of 0.6%. So the darkening rate is doubling every decade. And it to me, it's like an avalanche. I just find this really scary. So I'll stop that share and just invite Eliot to comment on how you got that data from NASA and what it might mean.
I mean, I am a data junkie, so if somebody gives me a source of data, I just try and find something meaningful to do with it. And, that dates all the way back to my career as a math professor. And I mean, in this case, you make a very interesting point about the increasing rate of albedo loss. And one of the main drivers for this that of course about is been a change in the clouds, in the low level clouds, and low level clouds tend to be brighter and thicker than high level, and so they tend to reflect more sunlight out into space than the higher level clouds that actually tend to trap heat a little bit. And so the question is, well, if about 85% of the albedo loss is due to change in cloud cover, and the rest would arguably be land changes, including loss of ice around the poles, what would cause the clouds to sort of have these turning points on these particular dates or times in history? And the truth is that there is this idea that called the aerosol masking effect. Hansen refers to it as the Faustian bargain, which is there has been this latent.
This is the famous climate scientist James Hansen.
Right?
Who testified to Congress back in '88, and he's written some really key papers in the last couple of years, which have been ignored by the climate policy community,
but mostly ignored, right? They are definitely on the fringe of what the models predict, and therefore they're not easily accepted into mainstream conversation. I don't tend to side with one person or another with these sorts of things. Life is too short to have those debates with people who have credentials way above my pay grade on these issues. But I mean, what is clear is that nations have been cleaning up their air. China, you might remember the Beijing Olympics, where you couldn't even see what was going on and how desperately they were trying to clean their air. And China's just been on a holy mission for the last 15 years to clean up its air.
That was 2008.
And they've done an incredible job of it. And so there's actually was a paper that tied the loss of Chinese aerosols, the sulfates, to the creation of what was known as the blob, which was this massive area of hot water off the coast of North America, Alaska, and Canada. And that blob was the primary driver for the great drought that existed in California and in the West in the mid-teens. So, I mean, there's a very direct line between aerosols and clouds. And, then we had the shipping regulations, which actually started to go into effect in 2015. And we're just really upped again in 2020, the IMO 2020 that reduced the sulfur content of shipping fuels. So, I mean, essentially you have this idea of the Faustian bargain that as we get rid of these pollutants, these aerosols, we're seeing the latent heat that was always there, now being able to make its way and be in terms of what's called absorbed solar radiation. It's not being reflected by the clouds. And so this idea of albedo is just a way of sort of seeing that happen in real time. We can see nations cleaning their air. We can see changes in shipping fuel regulations, right? We can see all of these things being pulled back, and the latent warming that was always there, as Hansen called it, the warming in the pipeline, is starting to make its appearance.
So, Eliot, could you comment on the concept of an accelerating feedback?
Well, I mean, a feedback is by itself going to imply something that is unstoppable once it's started. So, for example, as the Arctic heats up and is heating at roughly 4x the rate of the rest of the world, that melts the Arctic ice, that exposes more ocean. That ocean then is darker than the ice and snow that covered it. That darker ocean then absorbs more sunlight faster, heating that region even faster. So we have this feedback. As far as accelerating, that's a word that is not often applied to feedbacks. So in fact, I can't think of another instance of it. I mean, we have these feedback mechanisms, but the fact that you are showing a doubling in albedo, I don't think that is a trend that is going to continue based on any scientific merit, but I think it will continue at least at its current rate for the time being. And so I think what we're seeing here are turning points in terms of human aerosol production, and that's what's causing these what they would be referred to are change points that you've highlighted.
Yeah, so we've got these like it was fairly flat for the first decade of the century, and then it's gone into a constantly faster decline. It just worries me that what's going to slow down that acceleration.
Well, once we've sort of released all the latent heat that was being trapped, by having all these aerosols or hidden by the aerosols, we can expect it to stabilize, this rate to stabilize again. The clouds will hit some sort of plateau in terms of their decrease. And there won't be any Arctic ice left to melt anymore, so we won't have any more increased albedo by that feedback mechanism. So, yeah, the drivers will sort of hit an equilibrium.
That is a lot. I mean, right there, you've already reached doomsday. You get rid of all the ice, and it's game over.
Well, I mean, the question is what's going to stop it, and there are natural forces that will stop this. Yeah, so it's
but they might not be compatible with the world economy.
Well, yeah. Yeah, no, human civilization is not compatible with what these trends are demonstrating, and that's part of being a doomer, is understanding those very concepts. That this chart in particular is not as dire as some of the others that are out there right now, but it certainly is among the ones that is most important and getting least noticed at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, like canaries in the coal mine for the world climate. All right,
Yeah.
I'll go on to another one, and let's see. I'll just hit my right button. And yeah, question mark about where we're headed in the future. Just don't know. Now, with this one, Eliot, this is one that you put up, monthly Arctic sea ice volume from 1979 to 2026. And we can see the blue was back in the 80s, and the white is in the 90s. And now we've got these, like the amount of sea ice is just on a steady decline. And this year, 2026, is one of the lowest. And yeah, like you alluded to this before, but I'd just be interested if you could comment on this information.
So there are three variables that I track and that are tracked about Arctic sea ice. The first is the extent, just how far does it reach in all directions, and you add that up. And what you do is you sort of section off, and the way this is done is a 15 kilometer by 15 kilometer square would be considered one data point. And if there's some portion of that square has enough ice in it, I forget what the boundary is, 10% or 20% is ice covered, then you count that square as being having extent covering it for the purpose of the total calculation. So that's extent. The other is volume, and volume is what you have when you fill up a pitcher or a glass, or it's the total physical quantity of the substance in 3 dimensions. And the third is thickness. And thickness is just how far on average from the top of the ice pack until you poke through and hit the Arctic Ocean below it. So those three things are all being measured. I use a data source that comes out of Japan for the extent, JAXA, J-A-X-A, and I use another data source, Biomass, for the volume and the thickness. And so what you posted was a volume graphic, and that is actually based on data that I just got this morning. So way to be right on time with this. And so what is true at the present moment is that each of volume, thickness, and extent are all second lowest for the day. So at this particular moment, there was a previous time on record when it was lower. And you can see in this graphic that you have up that was 2017 for volume.
And I need help with this. I'm not good at reading maps and graphs. So please tell me what I'm seeing here. What I'm seeing is a wave, and I don't know what the coordinates are. You've got your pointer someplace close to the trough of this wave. Is this the date of? Explain what dates and volumes we're talking about here.
So in this graphic, the vertical axis from 0 to 35 is the total volume in term of the ice in terms of thousands of cubic kilometers. So if you had a point that was 15, that would be 15,000 cubic kilometers of ice total in the Arctic. Right? And so on. So going from left to right marks one calendar year. So the left axis is January, the right is December. So we have one calendar year. And for each month of each year, we have one data point. So there's a data point for January of 2026, another data point for February of 2026. And that's actually the midpoint right there. There it is. So one more. if you keep going, you want to go above the February. That's the data point for February of 2026. All right. And so we can see that each line kind of has a jagged appearance to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that I'm not measuring Arctic sea ice volume every day.
All
I'm
right.
getting one number per month from this organization.
Okay, well, now what I'm inferring is that this up and down wave motion simply reflects the fact that you're talking about the winter versus the summer, right?
Right.
The
Yeah.
trough means that's when the ice has mostly melted, and then it goes up,
Yes.
starts going up again in what, about October?
Right. So the minimum volume typically happens in September.
Uh-huh.
And then it'll start going up again until we hit a peak that is typically in March or April.
Uh-huh.
And so right now we just have the data that was just released for February. So I won't know March's value until early April, and I won't know April's value until early May. And we'll see whether we set a new record low for volume this year. Every indication is that, yes, we're going to set a new record low maximum. So a record low maximum, in other words, what's the most ice every year? This year is looking like it might be less total ice than ever before when we hit our maximum. The more important number, though, is the minimum, because it's the minimum is happening at the height of summer. That's when there's the least ice there. And in order to have a feedback, we need a lot of sunshine with a lot of open ocean. And so the maximum sunshine with the maximum open ocean happens in August. And that's why we see in September we hit these low records, right? This is sort of the residual of all of this melting and heat happening at the same time. And so the thing that people are waiting for as sort of a dire consequence is when we hit that zero line down there at the bottom. When this graph has a year where we hit zero, there is no more Arctic ice.
And that's known as the Blue Ocean event.
Well, the Blue Ocean event technically is when we get 1 million square kilometers of extent. It doesn't have anything to do with volume. But the idea is once we hit a Blue Ocean event, then very quickly we will transition into an ice-free Arctic. Because
all of that sunlight that used to be reflected by ice and the snow on top of the ice is now going into the water and heating up the water, which is an accelerating feedback.
Right, so it will rapidly heat up the water, making the water too warm to hold ice forevermore until the next cycle happens in the solar system. That.
And now President Trump thinks this is great because of shipping and mining.
It very well could be great in terms of shipping and mining in the short term. I mean, if the short term is the next 3 to 5 years, we might have the best days ever for shipping.
Yeah.
Right. So here's another one. Similar data. This is the thickness one, and we can just see how the thickness has fallen from 2.25 meters in 1980, and up and down to now it's only 1.25 meter. So all of the Arctic ice has got a lot thinner.
So this is a record low, right? This is hitting an actual record low. I said everything was second, but because we're doing a 12-month running mean rather than looking at the actual daily values, because we're averaging over the last 12 months to get a value, we do actually have the average thickness over the last 12 months, setting a new record low for any 12-month period that data has been collected. And so, again, what I have here vertically is the thickness of the ice, and horizontally are the years. And this is actually tracking, I believe, every single day of those years. So I have data from 365 days a year for each year. So when I say the average thickness, I'm talking about a true 12-month period starting yesterday, which is my latest data point, through a year before that, right? So this is a true year data point. This is up to the day as of yesterday, this particular graphic. Now, what you'll notice that there's quite a bit of volatility in this thickness. And that just really shows you how much weather can impact these short-term results for thickness, right? We have a huge storm and it breaks up the ice, or you just have very little weather, or you have winds heading in a certain direction causing the ice to pile up on itself. There's all sorts of things that can cause these short-term variations. So you definitely want to be looking at a long term. Now, one of the things I want to point out about this is that since about 2012, we've declined very little in thickness overall since 2012. And what you will have is a certain faction of doomers would look at this graphic and want to say, well, thickness is accelerating downward, or there's an exponential decline in thickness, or something like that. But it's really important to understand that there are other feedback loops that are negative feedback loops that tend to work against a fast melting of the Arctic. So, for example, the more open ocean you have, the more fog you get, right? And fog is reflective. And so there is this natural feedback that as the Arctic is melting, it's creating more conditions where, especially as the temperatures warm, where you can have these fog events. And so, really the truth is this is not declining as fast as it was, but it's still heading in a direction that's very dire.
And there's a concept called a dead cat bounce. So people looked at this precipitous decline from 2009 to 2012 and thought that we were headed towards a blue ocean event like in 2016. But then somehow it did this big rebound.
Yeah, and there's actually a couple of climate scientists who got caught in that trap. If you look at the data, not only this one thickness, but also volume and extent, they all seem to paint this picture as of about 2012, that absolutely, with near 100% certainty, the Arctic would be ice-free sometime between 2013 and 2016. It just looked inevitable, right? Mm-hmm. And yet here we are 10, 12 years later, and it's been virtually flatlined. So that, it is really important to not just say, oh, a peer-reviewed study said, right? Mm-hmm. But as a scientist, to be open to updating your beliefs based on new evidence.
And back here in the 1980s, this was all old ice, and this is all new ice now.
Well, that's the whole thickness thing, is like there's very little old ice left in the Arctic. Exactly, very true. It's very thin, fresh, new ice. And new ice tends to be, by the way, thinner ice actually lets more sunlight penetrate to the ocean below, right? So the thinner the ice, the more the lower the albedo, because you actually get some of the underlying darkness from the ocean filtering through.
Okay, Eliot, let's go on to this. You provide on your Climate Casino Facebook page a bonus doom quote for each day, and so this one from James Hansen: the runaway climate threat now is the danger that today's accelerated global warming will push Earth past a point of no return, with irreversible consequences for today's young people and their descendants. Let's just chat about that.
Yeah. Well, so James Hansen, excuse me, I have to reset my chair here. James Hansen is writing a new book, and it's called Sophie's Planet. He had, previous climate change book. What is it?
Films of My Grandchildren.
Grandchildren, right? So this book is sort of in process of being written. It's taken him far longer than he expected. And of course, things are changing so rapidly as he's writing it that it must be very challenging for him to does not want to just get stuck in a permanent loop of drafts. Any rate, he published an excerpt from chapter 10. And he just put that out today. If you subscribe to him on Substack, as I do, you get these notifications. And so this one was sent to me. Somebody said, "Hey, you should look in Hanson's latest thing that he published, his latest Substack post for your doom quote." And so I started reading the thing, looking for it, and sure enough, this one came out there. And I think it's one thing for me to say these words, but it's quite a different thing for James Hansen to be saying these words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So
and let me just add, the whole point of this quote is that he was transitioning from the concept of tipping points to the concept of a point of no return. And
right.
he was comparing the climates of Mars, the Earth, and Venus to each other, and talking about what it would take for the Earth to become a runaway greenhouse, there to be a runaway greenhouse effect. And that's what he's talking about when he's talking about the point of no return here, is that essentially we have uncontrolled heating beyond any point that civilization can be sustained.
Can cope with, so irreversible consequences. That's like, because we're so used in our ordinary life to feeling that the Earth is stable and predictable, and yet when you look back in over geological time, there's been such variation and such fragility, and things can happen quite suddenly. We're a bit like the turkey on the day before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I'm interested in what we can do about it, but I'll just keep going with a couple of other questions so let's just talk about Wile E. Coyote, isn't it? It's fun. This is the idea that Hansen has raised, that it's very very pessimistic, isn't it? Because Wile E. Coyote comes back to life and chases the Roadrunner again every new episode, but that's obviously that's a sort of fantasy, isn't it?
So I think that this underscores part of what the Doomer's philosophy is, that there is half of the bell curve, or maybe just a part of the tail of the bell curve, that is just sort of we're not allowed to talk about, right? This is language we're not allowed to use in journal papers. These are terrors that have a much higher probability than having a plane crash that you're on, right? These are events that have a 20 or 30% chance of occurring now. And in terms of the runaway climate, there is a good argument to be made that we will hit 3C by mid-century as part of that tail argument. And I believe there's a recent German paper that came out that said just that. So when you have these tail events and yet you're limited in speaking about them and being taken seriously when you do, then you have someone like James Hansen say that, right? It gives permission to other people to be able to talk about real possibilities, and also the existential fear that brings up for them. So, I just think one of the reasons Hansen is a hero is not his science, but the way he opens doors for conversations that many people don't want to have or don't want to exist.
Yeah, I noticed that Michael Mann criticized Hansen's major global warming in the paper, global warming in the pipeline paper, on the day it came out without even reading it.
Well, I don't know, the history between Michael Mann and James Hansen. I will say that this idea that there are these climate models that were disregarded by the IPCC, the sort of they sort of cherry picked their way through the models and discarded certain models that Hansen refused to discard. And these models show a much more dire situation going into the future. That I understand as a scientist myself being bombarded by sort of fringe stuff, right, coming in my way, occupying my time, people asking me questions, people saying, you got to look at this. Still happens to me to this day quite a bit, mostly in the casino industry, with people with their fringe ideas about how they beat casino games. And you only have so much energy for that. So that said, I have great respect for climate science. I was, as a math professor, I was advisor to the pre-meteorology program. And this was in Ohio. And the one university most of my students aspire to go to is the one where Michael Mann is a distinguished professor. So I am really hard put to say he's just wrong about this. I do think he is opening up now over time to more dire futures than he was allowing himself to consider earlier, when he wrote, some of his books, like The New Climate War, would be an example where that was just an all-out attack on Wallace Wells. That entire book was really like Wells did not listen to me. He shouldn't be saying this stuff. He's wrong about most of it.
And remind us the title of Wells' book. That was about catastrophe, wasn't it?
It's called The Uninhabitable Earth.
Yeah.
And essentially, what Wells did was take a worst case scenario and play it out. And that's, it could happen.
Whereas on the other side, we've got what you've quite caustically termed hope porn. Could you explain that to us?
So there is a very, very gifted writer. His name is George Saccharides or something like this, and he posts on Substack and elsewhere. And he came up with this concept of hope porn. And I just thought that it was so much sort of more on target than what I had heard doomers use, which is the phrase hopium, hope as a drug, hope as something that numbs you, right? Hope as an escape, hope as an evil. And I have written about this in the past. I wrote an essay called Choking on Hope that essentially went back to the original Pandora's box story and discussed the original meaning of hope being the one evil that was not released from that box. And in that context, hope was deceptive expectation. In other words, the correct way to interpret the ancient language today, we use the word hope, but the original meaning was deceptive expectation. You set up an expectation about a future that is based on lies, right? Like this car is going to run great. You should pay me $5,000 for it. It's like, no, I'm selling a junker. You set up an expectation. It's what most of marketing is about, in fact. Mm-hmm. So I have been sort of against the use of the word hope in any context for a long, long time. And then I saw this terminology, hope porn, and I decided to explore it. And what I found is that it fit very well certain arguments that mainstream climate scientists were making in their books. In other words, they're not talking about real solutions. They're talking sort of about how we all need to come together and be one family and all see the light and there is a way and we can all find the way together. And it's just this way of sort of speaking that is so ungrounded in real solutions or real understanding of humans.
My attitude is that it's possible to stabilize the climate if we restore planetary albedo as a precondition, but that's extremely difficult when you've got the whole climate industry and the fossil industry against you, and so the prospect of hope is really challenging.
There's sort of two angles on that. The first is just to go back to albedo and that first picture you put up. Just to give a sense for how hard it would be to restore albedo. If we wanted to restore planetary albedo to where it was in the year 2000, and we were to do that sort of using the most naive method possible, which would be to just put mirrors around the planet. Just, aluminum mirrors, just line mirrors so that they reflect sunlight back out into space. And this is actually what the Mirror Reflection Project, originally, that was their proposal. How many mirrors would we need if we were to put mirrors all around the planet at the equator?
Long.
Yeah. 40,000 kilometers, band of mirrors at the equator where we get the most sunlight we could possibly reflect. How far north and south would I need to go just to go back to the albedo we had in the year 2000? And the answer comes out to be about 84 kilometers wide. That's how daunting that task is. But I mean, the other question is, why would we want to? What are we actually doing there? We are saying that our goal is to preserve civilization, that the sacred thing here is human civilization. What do I need to do to protect human civilization? And I was an environmentalist growing up, and I grew up in the 1970s during the heyday of the environmental movement, where pretty much all of the main laws in this country were set. So what was the environmental movement about back when, I was a child, back when DDT was outlawed, back when the Clean Air Act was put in place, and clean water and lead and, chlorofluorocarbons and all those actions. It was about saving the planet. It was about saving ecosystems. It was about saving species, right? The Endangered Species Act in our country. It was about what can we do to preserve the planet. And the problem has changed, is for me personally, is there has been this metamorphosis of the environmental movement, where now the question is, what do we need to do to save civilization? We need mirrors. We need to decrease albedo. What do we need to do to save civilization? We need more solar power. We need more wind. We need to re-up nuclear power. What do we need to do to save civilization, right? Is the wrong question. And if the answer is the answer to the wrong question, we have to go back and say, what is the question? And so, there's these two authors. They wrote books, almost came out at the same time. One is Catherine Hayhoe, who wrote Saving Us, and the other is Dana Fisher, who wrote the book Saving Ourselves. And I wrote a follow-up essay, which was called Saving Everything Else, right? So for me, yes, it'd be nice to have a 100-mile wide reflective mirrors around the planet. That would cool the planet,
Except there's people living there, so it's pretty impractical.
No, I mean you couldn't, you couldn't, not in a million years, ever really do this. But I mean, it's just to give a sense of the scale.
But we could inject sulfur into the stratosphere, and
of course
that could return temperature back to.
Well, it would return it as long as we kept up injecting it, and it has, I forget what the half-life is, whether it's 6 months to 2 years or something like that before it naturally precipitates, but it's a very short half-life, and you get this impact called the termination shock, right? So in other words, this is just like Hansen's issue with aerosols, that as soon as we were to stop some radiation management, no matter how good it is, no matter what it does, we will suddenly revert back all of this hidden warming. And in particular, it decreases the incentive for fossil fuel companies and for societies to have effective measures to mitigate their emissions. So it's certainly something that could buy us some time, right? But the question is, time for what? And if the answer is to save civilization, that's where I'm a
Yeah.
doomer.
So, like for me, being a human being, I have an interest in the survival of
Of
civilization,
humans,
and I
right?
think that would be an intrinsic good.
And so there is that conversation, and there is this whole concept of speciesism, of somehow thinking of humans as a more relevant, important species. I doubt, a deer in the forest thinks of humans as the most important species, right?
Well, you shared this story about pushing insects towards extinction. Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Well, I just go online every morning. It's been something I've done for years now, is to go online. I wake up way too early. And when I go online, it's like, okay, what do I have to do this morning? I go to my data websites and I update all my spreadsheets with whatever the latest data is. Then I go looking through my book collection or somewhere else for my daily doom quote. And then I either find it right away or it comes sometime during the day. If I'm lucky, I'll find a moment of doom. So, what I'm attempting to do is educate in general. So, I go fishing for a story every day that I think is, part of a person's education about everything going on right now. And we can only consume so many stories. So let me offer you one today. And this particular story that you had put up there, the content of it is that the temperatures in the tropical regions are warming faster. I believe it was at ground level than a certain huge block of insects could sustain. In other words, there's a natural evolutionary process because insects have a very short lifetime and they reproduce, so they evolve very quickly. There's also the capacity to migrate, and what they're saying is even with those two resources, it's not enough for a huge block of insects. And that's essentially what this was about. We are losing insects, especially pollinators, all over the planet, and that decline. Anybody who was alive 50 years ago and remembers what it was like to drive and the insects smashing into your windshield, really understands just how bad the insect apocalypse already is. And this is just a story about how much worse it's going to get.
And then plants and birds rely on insects. Everything
Well,
relies on it.
yeah. I mean, it's yes. It's just a terribly sad moment for the planet. There's no question about it.
Let's just check in with Meta. Meta, how are you going?
Well, I'm thinking about this concept of hope. And I was impressed by your notion of hope porn, but because in a way it confirms my attitude. But I think the difference is that I'm surrounded by people who really believe that hope is necessary psychologically, and that this is if we destroy people's hope, their motivation to work or to make any changes will be depleted. They'll simply sit down under a tree and wait to die. And that may be the case. But when I look at myself as an activist, I realize that I'm not motivated by hope. I think it's true. I'd like to believe that it's true, that if I have a sense of obligation, I think I'm actually motivated by duty, a sense of I have a mission. I think the good Lord gives us a duty, a responsibility. I'm kind of a panpsychist. I'm really enthusiastic about Michael Levin's work now, who is convincing me that every particle, or at least every cell that's ever been created, had a duty, a mission, a goal built in, or it could be you could change the goal, but we all have goals, and that these living creatures, at least the living creatures, have goals, and I know that I do. And of course, you don't go around, if you're smart, you don't go around saying, God gave me this mission and I'm the one who's supposed to do it, and so on, because you don't really know. J.D. Vance thinks he knows, but the rest of us aren't so sure. But at any rate, I do have this sense of duty, and I do feel that if I believe that if I know that something's not going to work, or if I believe that there's no chance that this obligation that I have is going to succeed, but I feel that this is what I'm supposed to be doing, I'll do it anyway. And I don't need hope to motivate me. So, in practical terms, I guess I agree with the people who say that hope is a deleterious thing. I don't think it's deleterious, but I don't think it's necessary.
What hope really means is, A, you believe there is a solution, right? You don't have hope if you say this is impossible. So hope entails believing there is a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Hope also entails believing that there is one or more individuals who are capable of carrying out that solution, right? So it means you believe there's a solution, you believe there are people or governments or organizations that exist that can carry that thing out. Number three, it means that you are not the person doing it, because you would not have hope if you were actually the person on the ground implementing the solution that you knew 100% would work. You would just be the worker working on that solution, right?
Well, that's kind of the way I think of myself, that I'm not sure this is going to work, and it would be arrogant of me to go around boasting about how I'm saving the world. Yeah. But I think I damn well better try, and that I better do the best I can. And so I'm not sure of what I should be doing, but I do think I should. I do have some sense of where I think I better be going, and so this is not conviction that it's going to work. It's really, it's not hope. It's duty. Right now, I think AI, there's almost a 50-50 chance that it's going to replace human beings, and not too far in the future. And I certainly don't hope that that happens, and I'm not convinced that it necessarily will, and I'm not even really convinced that it would be a bad thing. It's possible that, with evolution, maybe our time on this planet as the dominant species should come to an end and be replaced by something better.
This dog was just biting my sleeve, so I have to show him to you. This is my dog, Sunny.
Hello. He's so cute. It's always good to have dogs on videos because, especially cats.
Well, I have a cat here somewhere too.
They up the algorithm. Look.
Sorry, excuse me.
So that raises the issue of the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox. Where are they? That is intelligent civilization vociferous? I mean, does it naturally tend to self-destruction because our instincts collide with our reason, and we run our society based on instinct, but we've got all of this powerful rational stuff that's given us fossil fuels and nuclear bombs and so on. That's just tending us towards collapse. So so it raises this problem. To me, like Meta mentioned the good Lord, and so it raises this sort of religious framework. And so I'm going to share a quote from St. Paul about this. We rejoice in our suffering, for suffering produces endurance, endurance creates character, character creates hope, and hope does not fail. What I find really interesting in this line, to say that we rejoice in our suffering, is enjoining a profound level of realism and honesty. So it's not saying our suffering is not real, we deny it, or we just we despair in it, but we think through the suffering in order to try to find a path to create hope of a better future, of planetary abundance. I'm just so I'll throw that in for either Eliot or Meta to respond.
Well, I mean, I still have an issue with the word hope in that quote, just as I did before. So, I mean, I wouldn't want hope to be what character created in me. I would want discipline and honesty and a good work ethic and friendliness and charity and actual things, qualities of being human that I consider to be positive, to be the result of that experience that he's describing. Having this sort of vacuous thing called hope as the thing that comes out of it is kind of it's sort of a meaningless statement. And again, I'm showing
I don't see it as meaningless because it's pointing towards the flourishing of human civilization as a goal, and you've expressed quite an anger about that because of this sixth extinction problem. What right do we as a species have to send the rest of the planet into extinction for our interests?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's exactly right, and this is the kind of speciesism that I personally reject, and I don't think humans are exceptional in any way as a species.
Except we've got intelligence, we've got language.
Other species have intelligence and language also. Crows can use tools. Elephants are one of several species that can self-identify. They pass the mirror test, so they have self-consciousness.
But human planetary dominion is of a scale far beyond any other species. Yeah.
Dolphins have a complex social organization together with a language that we barely understand, but they certainly use to communicate. I mean, we are one end of the evolutionary process that will not last very long on this planet compared to other species and how long they've lasted. And in our short duration on this planet, we are ruining it for upwards of 1,000 species a day. It's a crazy amount of catastrophe we humans are creating for the planetary environment in the name of believing we're exceptional in some sense. So I think you are seeing where we differ very strongly in terms of our philosophical basis for what should come next. And, I understand that you have this whole idea of leading with albedo, increasing albedo before everything else. And that is certainly a path we could take that would allow civilization to last a little bit longer. The Seneca cliff is coming one way or another, this idea that we're in overshoot, we're in population overshoot, to use William Catton's idea.
Why is it called the Seneca Cliff?
Well, the idea is that the longer you push to not have a inevitable change happen, the worse it will be when it happens. The harder we'll fall, right? The longer we put off the fall, the harder the fall will be. And as a compassionate human for other humans, I would just prefer humans, along with all other species, suffer as little as possible as civilization collapses. So I'm all for it. If Donald Trump hastens the collapse of civilization, as much as I loathe the man, right, it may ultimately be the best thing for the planet in terms of preserving the environment of the planet, or at least as much of it as possible for whatever comes after humans. I mean, I am looking after humans. Humans will be gone soon. How much of this beautiful planet can we save for whatever comes after us? And let's stop killing species, at this incredible rate.
But we've had this science fiction hope that humans will get through this crisis and learn how to atone for our destruction of nature and learn to
Yeah.
live in harmony with the planet, and will
Yeah.
then expand through the solar system and the galaxy over millions of years. Like, have
I've
we got?
seen that. I've seen people say that as recent as today. I've seen that opinion expressed. So yeah,
I
that's
think
certainly
I'm
there.
someplace in between you guys. Well, because I don't agree with Eliot that hope is necessarily deleterious, but I don't necessarily think that it's constructive either. I think the usual formulation is that hope is necessary to motivate us to do the right thing. If we have no hope, we simply sit down and go passive and let everything wipe us out. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I know a lot of people who get their inspiration from hope, and I think Robbie is one of them. Leave him alone, Eliot. He's doing fine. He's doing good work.
Oh
So
no,
don't hurt him.
I
And I
It's
personally
a
do
really
not
constructive
depend on
conversation,
hope.
that I really appreciate it.
no, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm an invited guest here. I'm doing my best to not, go beyond my role here, and I appreciate having this conversation. It's rare that I get to express these opinions in this way, and I appreciate that, you're open to having me as a guest, and you get what you get with me, and that's why
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm also not agreeing with Robbie in that I don't need hope. I mean, of course, I sometimes I cherish it, but nevertheless, I think it's possible to get along without hope, out of a sense of duty. If you have a sense of what you're supposed to be doing, the real problem occurs is, because we don't know for sure what our duties are or what the good Lord expects of us. And I do try to not be too arrogant about being sure that I know that I'm doing the right thing. But I also believe it's important to keep trying, even though I'm not so sure. So I'm working in a context of uncertainty, and just hoping that maybe someplace there's something's working to make it all work out. But I wouldn't bet on it.
yeah.
So what I'm really interested in is a reform of Christianity to make it compatible with science. And I know that seems impossible to most people who are familiar with the church. But like, there are some pretty amazing lines in the Bible, and my favourite is from Revelation 11:18, where it says, "The wrath of God is against those who destroy the earth." And I find that really profound, because like, this concept of the wrath of God, traditionally it's a supernatural idea, and yet when we look at climate catastrophe, it can be interpreted in those sort of terms. The act of God. The planet suddenly turns out to be a lot more sensitive and fragile than we'd expected, and things fall into collapse. That can be understood against this traditional language of the wrath of God. But then what the Bible says is that if we repent, we can be forgiven. And now that's been taken in a very superficial way. But like, I take it to say, if we change course, if we somehow create a paradigm shift to reverse trajectory so that we can align with nature, so that we can promote biodiversity, then we've got some hope of humanity being an ongoing part of life on our planet.
Okay, well, let me. I do not want to hijack this conversation, but I have to slip in this little bit that I have now been persuaded and convinced by scientific experimentation by Michael Levin and his group that all kinds of minds exist in all kinds of places. We are not the only minds around. Animals have them, but even organs of our own body have minds that they have things they're supposed to be doing, and they try to get their way. And if you get in their way and obstruct them and block them, they'll find innovative ways of getting to their goals. So there are, if you think of minds as intelligence as the ability to pursue goals by various alternative means, you can look and find minds in microscopic bacteria and all cells in every component of every living thing, and some people would say even in other places that are not alive. For example, AI, metal and so on. So I'm now of the persuasion that we have to be able to identify other minds and have some at least compassion for them and recognize that that they have maybe a place in the universe too, and that if you're really going to hope for anything, my hope would be pinned on the possibility that if human beings are silly enough to kill ourselves and destroy our environment so we can survive, that the other minds that are all around us will somehow take up the slack and move forward, and that we're on a trajectory that none of us can understand. And boy, have we gone astray from what we usually talk about in Project Save the World activities. I've never expressed these views before, but I can't help it.
Good on you, Here's one of my favourite books, The Hidden Life of Trees. And what's it say there? What trees feel, how they communicate, discoveries from a secret world. Just respect for consciousness within nature. I think that's pretty fundamental. And so we're coming to the end. We've rambled a bit here, and I'd like Eliot to sum up a few of his thoughts from the conversation.
Oh, I just appreciate that you would have me as a guest. I'm known as a doomer. I would invite the two of you and anybody listening to go to my website, climatecasino.net, where I have essays on hope and related topics. It's more expository and less data-driven. I think that the main message I have is that environmentalism has lost its way, that environmentalism should be about saving the planet, saving species, saving nature, saving the natural world, and not about saving civilization. And thank you for the invitation and sharing your thoughts. And I'm glad we took you a little bit off track, Meta. That was a pleasure having you say that and express the thoughts you did. So thanks to the two of you, and thank you.
Well, thank you. And this has been not only fun, but I guess it's filled a gap.
Yeah, let's start with science and base our hope on facts, and base our values on facts.
Well, that I think we can all agree on.
That's one thing I really value in Eliot's work is just a very rigorous scientific approach to the world and reality.
Okay.
Looking forward to Sandy Trust, author of Climate Scorpion, the concept of planetary solvency and impacts of climate change on insurance.
Oh, that's important. So important. Yes. All right. Onward. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.